What if the happiest wedding photos of old Hollywood weren't love stories at all, but armor? In a town where contracts could dictate who you dated and headlines could end a career, some of the most photogenic romances were carefully arranged shields. Back then, people like us didn't need tabloids to read between the lines. You could feel when something didn't add up. Tonight, we're counting down the most talked about lavender marriages, unions that kept reputations intact while private lives stayed private. Some were partnerships, some were lifelines, a few were heartbreaks. See how many you recognize as we climb from 17 to 1. And if 3 names are already on the tip of your tongue, jot them in the comments and check how close you get by the end. Number 17, Janet Gainor and Adrien. America's first Academy Award-winning leading lady marrying MGM's genius costume designer looked like a fairy tale on the studio lot. And in some ways it was. Janet Gainor and Adrien, the famed Adrien on screen, born Adrien Adolph Greenberg, built a dignified, mutually loyal home life, welcomed a son, and navigated premieres arm in arm. But even in their own circles, friends quietly understood the arrangement. He was the elegant architect of other people's glamour. She was a beloved star, trying to keep her private world out of the papers. Together, they created CALM, companionship, stability, and a public picture that satisfied an industry obsessed with appearances. What stands out, even now, is how respectful the pact seems. No breathless scandals from either side, no public meltdowns, just 2 consummate professionals protecting each other from a town that punished nonconformity. If you remember Gainor from Seventh Heaven or A Star is Born, you probably remember that serenity in her face. This marriage preserved it, and yet, behind the serenity, there's the cost. Living by a script handed down by a studio culture that demanded tidy narratives. Their union lasted until death parted them. Proof that some lavender marriages were less about deceit and more about surviving the times with grace. Next up, a perfect couple image, crafted so flawlessly that even the wedding day couldn't hide the strain it was built to bear. Number 16, Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor. On paper, it was perfect. Barbara Stanwyck, the steel-spine star audiences trusted, and Robert Taylor, the matinee idol with the postcard profile. In a town that prized tidy stories, this one tidied up a lot. Whisper networks had been busy. The studio needed quiet. So in 1939, the wedding arrived. White gloves, camera bulbs, headlines that said, "Normal." Inside the fairy tale, the seams showed. Industry veterans still repeat the wedding day anecdotes, the missing kiss, the separate goodnight, as signals that this was a union built for optics more than intimacy. Even if some details have blurred with time, the larger truth felt obvious to people who lived through that era. The marriage solved a publicity problem, and for a while, it worked. 12 years of polite photographs, 2 careers kept bankable, and a calm surface that reassured fans who wanted their stars to match the posters. If you grew up with Stella Dallas on late-night TV, or remember Taylor's glossy MGM romances, you remember how convincing those images were. That was the point. 2 pros doing what pros did, protecting the paycheck, protecting each other, and protecting the illusion the town demanded. The divorce in 1951 felt less like a breakup than the end of a contract everyone understood from the start. But what happens when the facade doesn't even survive the first night? When the door, quite literally, closes on the honeymoon? Number 15, Niels Ather and Vivian Duncan. He had the kind of stillness the silent era loved. Niels Ather, the male Garbo, eyes that told you everything and nothing. In 1930, he married Vivian Duncan of the Duncan sisters, and the fan magazines sighed with relief. A handsome leading man, a wholesome bride, a baby soon after, smiles on the studio steps. For audiences our age, that picture felt familiar, tidy, reassuring, built to quiet the chatter that swirled around beautiful people who didn't fit easy boxes. Inside the frame, it never settled. Industry circles quietly said Ather's private affections didn't match his matinee image. The marriage, meant to soften the whispers, only paused them. Within 2 years, it was over, cordial but final, and the leading roles cooled. You could still catch him, fine, controlled, slightly distant, in smaller parts, but the all-cap stardom slipped away. That's how the system worked. Sell the dream, steady the brand, and if the cover won't hold, move the spotlight along. What lingers is the cost. A decent man, a dutiful partner, a child in the middle, and a town that rewarded the pose more than the person. If you remember Astor's brooding close-ups on late-night TV, you remember how convincing he was at romance. Off-screen, the era demanded a different performance entirely. Next comes a marriage where personality could outshout almost any rumor. Almost. Number 14, Tula Bankhead and John Emory. A voice like smoke, a laugh that rattled chandeliers. Tula Bankhead never tiptoed anywhere. In 1937, she married actor John Emory, and for a brief spell, the columns exhaled, rings on fingers, professional schedules aligned, rumors pushed to the back page. Those of us who remember her from radio quips and late-night talk show stories know Tula ran hotter than any rule book. The marriage felt tidy on paper. 2 working actors, matching glamour, but the temperature never quite matched the photographs. 4 years later, in 1941, they called it off without fireworks. No children, no public brawl. Just 2 people stepping out of a frame that never fit quite right. What the union did provide was cover, useful in a decade when a woman's social life was dissected like a script, line by line. Bankhead kept the spotlight where she wanted it, on the work, the wit, the next entrance. Emory, talented and steady, moved forward too. If you ever caught Tula's crackling one-liners, you could hear the calculation behind the chaos. She knew exactly how much to give the public and how much to keep. Sometimes a Lavender marriage wasn't a scandal. It was an umbrella, opened when the weather turned ugly, folded when the sky cleared. Next, a partnership so seamless and professional that gossip could never find a clean edge to grip. Only the silhouette of a PAC. Number 13, Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontan. If you loved the great stage couples, you remember these 2 inhaling and exhaling in perfect unison. Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontan married in 1922 and spent a lifetime shoulder to shoulder. Rehearsals, curtain calls, train compartments, country retreats, moving like a single intention. The whispers were there, they always were in those days, but no proof ever rose above a murmur. What the public could see was the pact. Immaculate professionalism, no scenes for the papers, privacy guarded like a crown jewel. For folks our age, their radio appearances and early TV clips hold the feeling of a private language. Finishes picked up mid-sentence, jokes landed with a glance, the kind of trust you only earn by going through weather together. Whether it was grand romance, quiet arrangement, or some wise middle ground, the result was the same. A fortress of companionship that let them keep the work in front and the world at bay. In an industry that punished difference and devoured secrets, they built a border and held it. That's what makes their story linger. Not scandal, but stamina. 2 people choosing solidarity every day, long after the headlines lost interest. Next, a wedding night that locked itself into legend, when a closed door said more than a dozen press releases. Number 12, Rudolph Valentino and Jean Aker. A fairy tale wedding that unraveled before midnight. In November 1919, Rudolph Valentino, the silent era's great lover, married actress Jean Aker and smiled for the cameras like any new groom. Then came the part fans our age still mention with a knowing shrug. On the honeymoon night, Aker reportedly locked the door, and the marriage never truly began. Inside the industry, friends already understood Aker's heart leaned elsewhere. She moved in artistic circles, where women quietly loved women, and a public husband solved more problems than it created. The separation followed almost immediately, the divorce a few years later. Valentino carried on as the screen's dream, satin shirts, smoldering close-ups, while off-screen questions chased him from column to column. Aker, for her part, found the private life that fit her better once the headlines cooled. If you remember those old fan magazines, you remember how they printed the smiles and skipped the silences. This union lives in the silences, a picture-perfect pose that couldn't survive a closed door. Next, we step back, before Hollywood learned the trick, when the template for these careful unions was set far from the studio lot. Number 11. Oscar Wilde and Constance Lloyd. Before Hollywood learned the trick, London wrote the script. In 1884, Oscar Wilde married Constance Lloyd, a bright, thoughtful woman who built a quiet home around a man the world saw as dazzling. 2 little boys, cabinet photographs, the look of Victorian respectability. Folks our age met Wilde first on book covers, then in footnotes, wit on the page, trouble in the margins. In private, his loves did not match the era's rules. And when the courts made that private life public in 1895, the sentence broke more than a career. Constance gathered the children, changed the family name, and slipped into a smaller life abroad, so they could walk the street without whispers. This wasn't Hollywood, but the pattern is familiar. A marriage as shelter in weather that could turn cruel without warning. And like so many stories you and I grew up hearing, the human cost sits between the lines. The affection that was real, the secrecy that was required, the public that demanded a simpler picture than the truth could offer. If you've ever held an old edition of The Importance of Being Earnest and felt the ache under the jokes, that's the life beneath the performance. From courtrooms and headlines to studio contracts and fan magazines, the strategy traveled well, and the stakes only got higher once the cameras arrived. Number 10, Cole Porter and Linda Lee Thomas. If you grew up humming the old standards, you know the sparkle, Cole Porter turning wit into melody, and beside him the elegant Linda Lee Thomas. They married in 1919 and moved through the world like a well-choreographed duet. Paris winters, grand parties, a salon where everyone worth quoting eventually sat. People close to them understood the arrangement. Deep loyalty, real affection, and private lives kept discreet. Porter's romantic life ran on a parallel track. Linda guarded the public picture, and, more than that, guarded him. When a riding accident shattered Cole's legs in 1937, she became his constant. Nurses, doctors, schedules, so the songs could keep coming. Listen again to those lyrics we all know by heart. There's a wistfulness under the cleverness, the feeling of someone writing what he could say and what he couldn't. Their marriage ended only with Linda's passing in 1954, proof that a Lavender union could be less a ruse than a shelter. 2 people built together because the times gave them few better choices. For our generation, that's the memory. Grace under scrutiny, devotion without spectacle, a partnership that let the work outshine the whispers. Next, we return to Hollywood, where a second walk down the aisle stirred as much talk as the first. Number 9, Rudolph Valentino and Natasha Ramboa. The second try looked like destiny. Rudolph Valentino, the silent screen's great lover, and Natasha Ramboa, the modern, sharp-eyed designer who seemed to sculpt him anew. They first wed in Mexico in 1922. Too soon, as it turned out, because his divorce from Jean Aker wasn't final. Back in Los Angeles, Valentino was briefly arrested on a bigamy technicality, and the couple had to cool their heels until the papers were clean. They married again, properly, in 1923, and for a moment, the photographs matched the dream. If you remember the fan magazines of that era, you remember how Ramboa was framed. Brilliant? Yes, but too influential. A woman with opinions in a business that preferred its wives silent. Whispers about both of them swirled, some admiring, some malicious, and the studio bristled at the control she seemed to have over his career. Inside the house, that same tug-of-war wore them down. By 1925, the marriage was over. Valentino's mystique only deepened, and Ramboa kept her poise as the town moved on to the next story. What lingers for those of us who grew up with his smoldering close-ups is the contrast. The man sold as the ultimate romantic partner navigating a love life the public was never meant to decode. On screen, he promised certainty. Off-screen, everything was negotiation. Next, a union built on music and loyalty. Proof that some arrangements were as tender as any love story. Number 8, Danny Kaye and Sylvia Fine. To most of us, Danny Kaye was joy in motion. Quick hands, quicker tongue, a face that could turn mischief into music. In 1940, he married Sylvia Fine, the composer who shaped his numbers and sharpened his timing. And suddenly, the act had a heartbeat. The public picture was simple and solid. A working marriage, a baby, long nights at the piano, 2 careers braided into one. If you remember those holiday specials and USO clips, you remember the rhythm. Her at the keys, him at full sail, the kind of teamwork you can't fake. Around them, as with so many in that era, the whisper machine never entirely went quiet. The marriage steadied it. More than a shield, it was an engine. Contracts, tours, films, a home life that photographed beautifully and let the work eclipse the chatter. Through the post-war boom and into television, they kept that pact. Professional, loyal, durable, until the credits finally rolled decades later. What lingers is the craft. 2 people solving the problem of a hostile time with discipline and devotion, so audiences like us could simply enjoy the show. Sometimes a Lavender marriage wasn't a headline. It was a workspace where talent could breathe. Next, a matinee idol whose fairy tale home couldn't keep real life from knocking at the door. Number 7, Tyrone Power and Annabella. He was Fox's crown prince, the matinee idol whose posters lived on bedroom walls. Annabella was the luminous French star who married him in 1939 and, for a while, made the dream look simple. If you lined up for the Mark of Zorro or copied that pencil mustache at the barbershop, you remember the spell Tyrone Power cast. At home, the picture seemed steady. A smart townhouse, quiet dinner parties, 2 careers trying to share one spotlight. Then came distance. War service pulled him overseas. Long shoots kept him moving, and the whispers, always part of that era, followed along. Friends remembered a man who drew devotion from every direction. Columnists remembered late nights that didn't fit the fan magazine script. Reports from the time speak of romances on the road and temptations that outpaced discretion. There are stories, too, of a complicated entanglement with Judy Garland. Whether every version is true or not, the strain was. By 1948, the marriage ended, and the fairy tale photos went back in their frames. What lingers for those of us who grew up on his close-ups is the contrast, a real marriage that also served as shelter, trying to hold against the weather of fame. Image can steady a career, it can't referee desire. In Hollywood's calculus, even genuine affection sometimes had to share a house with strategy. Next, a Vegas wedding measured in months, a breath held and then released. Number 6, Judy Garland and Mark Herron. In 1965, under Vegas lights that make everything look possible, Judy Garland said yes to actor Mark Herron. For those of us who grew up with her voice in the living room, records spinning on Sunday afternoons, the photographs felt like hope. Judy smiling, a fresh start after hard seasons. The marriage lasted 5 months before the breath ran out. Inside their circle, friends already understood that Herron's longtime bond with Henry Brandon ran deeper than the public knew. The wedding tamped down whispers for a moment, not forever. What the era demanded was a neat picture. Judy tried to give it TV specials, concerts, a brave face for people who needed her to be indestructible. Herron tried too, then drifted back to the life that fit him best once the headlines cooled. No spectacle at the end. Just the quiet closing of a chapter. If you remember her late career performances, the way she could turn a crack in the voice into pure feeling, you remember a woman who knew how to stand up after a fall. This marriage wasn't a scandal, so much as a pause between storms, a brief arrangement that couldn't carry the weight both of them were asked to shoulder. Next, a star born into glitter pairs, with a showman whose charm could light a marquee until real life stepped out from the wings. Number 5. Liza Minnelli and Peter Allen. A marriage made for spotlights. Liza Minnelli, all drive and dazzle, and Peter Allen, the showman with a grin that could light a marquee. They wed in 1967, young and dazzling, and for a while, the pictures looked perfect. Matching tuxes, shared stages, a life that seemed choreographed to applause. Those of us who watched Liza grow from her mother's shadow into her own stardom remember how natural they looked together. 2 entertainers who understood the rhythm of late nights and curtain calls. Inside that glow, the era's reality still applied. Insiders whispered, The public preferred the duet. Alan's charm never dimmed, but his truth did not fit the fan magazine frame. As the years wore on, the marriage floated on professionalism and goodwill more than heat. By 1974, they let it go gracefully, and a few years later, Alan spoke plainly about who he was. If you've ever replayed Liza's big ballads from that period, you can hear the courage it takes to stand in the right light after a difficult goodbye. What endures for our generation isn't scandal. It's the tenderness of two working artists trying to build shelter in a time that offered very few doors for honesty. The union did what many did then, bought quiet, bought time, until living plainly mattered more than living neatly. Ahead is a union that looked like a lifelong love story to the public, and to many, still does. Number 4, Judy Garland and Vincente Minnelli. To our generation, this looked like the happiest kind of Hollywood logic. Judy Garland, America's voice, marrying Vincente Minnelli, the visionary who framed her in light. They wed in 1945, welcomed baby Liza the next year, and for a time, the pictures felt like a promise. Home, music, a calm harbor after MGM's storms. Inside the circle, though, people understood a quieter truth. Before Hollywood, Vincente had lived more freely in New York's theater world. In California, the cameras required a tidier picture. Friends say Judy knew and managed as only Judy could, holding a family together while the work demanded everything. If you grew up watching Meet Me in St. Louis at holiday time, you remember the glow he could put around her. You also remember the strain that crept in later. Separations, private hurts, the studio grind. By 1951, they divorced with dignity, still bound by their love for Liza. Was it romance, arrangement, or both? For many who lived through that era, it felt like all three at once. Genuine affection, shaped by a town that punished any love it didn't understand. The marriage did what marriages often did then, bought quiet, bought time, and gave the world a daughter who carried both their lights. Next, the most debated leading man of them all, a silver screen prince whose tidy fourth marriage couldn't silence decades of whispers. Number 3, Cary Grant and Diane Cannon. To moviegoers of our generation, he was the blueprint. Charm in a tux, mischief in the eyes. In 1965, Cary Grant married Diane Cannon, a vibrant younger star who seemed to promise late-in-life calm. They welcomed a daughter, posed for the proud family photos, and for a moment, the old whispers went quiet. But only for a moment. The talk had followed Grant for decades, an unusually close bond with a fellow leading man in the 1930s, cozy domestic snapshots, rumors that never quite faded. Some of what's been printed since rests on memoir and memory. What's certain is that the marriage was brief. By 1968, it was over. Polite on record, painful between the lines. If you remember Grant gliding through Charade or North by Northwest, you remember how effortlessly he sold the ideal, debonair, unflappable, the safe ending every comedy promised. Off-screen, life refused to be that tidy. Cannon has described a household where control and tenderness wrestled. Fans saw only the smile. In the end, the union did what many did in that era, offered a reassuring picture, bought a little quiet, until the picture could no longer carry the weight. Next comes the classic studio solution, a last-minute wedding meant to dam a rising flood of gossip. Number 2, Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. If you grew up with black and white weeknights, you know the electricity. Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, trading lines like old friends, finishing each other's thoughts. They were never married to each other. Tracy stayed legally tied elsewhere. But from Woman of the Year to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the public saw a love story that felt inevitable. Inside the era, that appearance did useful work. Hepburn, tall, self-possessed, rumored to prefer her private life on her own terms. Tracy, devout, conflicted, a man whose off-screen friendships and struggles were managed with discretion. Put them together, and the questions quieted. Two titans who looked exactly like the poster promised. Biographers still argue over the details. How much was romance? How much was pact? but the shape is clear to people our age who watched it happen in real time. Solidarity. Hepburn protected Tracy from scrutiny. Tracy steadied Hepburn's image at a moment when independence in a woman could be misread as threat. They kept a careful house around the work and let the audience believe what it needed to. When Tracy died in 1967, Hepburn's grief said everything they never clarified in print. Some Lavender arrangements were paperwork. This one was presence. 2 lives braided so tightly, the town stopped tugging at the loose threads. Next, the studio's cleanest fix. A last-minute wedding meant to hold back a tabloid tide, and the most famous Lavender marriage of them all. Number 1, Rock Hudson and Phyllis Gates. To people our age, he was the template. Square-jawed, kind-eyed, the safe ending every romance promised. In late 1955, just as a scandal magazine sharpened its knives, Rock Hudson married Phyllis Gates, his agent's smart, steady assistant. The timing said everything. The studios needed it to say. America's favorite leading man was settled. For a while, the photos did their job. Hand-holding, house-hunting, the public reassured. Inside the circle, though, friends knew the pressure Rock lived under, and how unforgiving the era could be if private life didn't match the poster. The marriage lasted 3 years. Some remember it as a humane pact under impossible rules. Others recall distance and strain from the start. Gates later said she didn't know the truth about Rock when they wed. Old colleagues still argue that point. What's certain is the cost. He kept the world's dream alive on screen while walking a tightrope off it. And the town helped hold the net because the business depended on that illusion. When the divorce came in 1958, it landed softly in the papers. No fireworks. Just the tidy close of a chapter everyone pretended to understand. If you grew up with his TV appearances in the 70s, you remember the warmth that spilled off the set. That was real. So was the fear that shaped 1955. This remains the most famous Lavender marriage because it shows the whole mechanism at work. Image as armor, timing as strategy, 2 lives carrying a secret bigger than either of them. Old Hollywood sold us perfect pictures. Living people held them up. For some, these marriages were lifelines. For others, they were careful compromises so the work and the paycheck could go on. If you grew up with these faces on your TV like I did, you know the feeling. The smile on the poster and the silence between the lines. How many did you guess right at the start? Tell me your top 3 you nailed, and be honest about any you didn't see coming. Also, who do you think we missed, and who on this list shouldn't be here once the dust of rumor settles? Your memories matter. You watched this happen in real time. If tonight's stories stirred something, curiosity, sympathy, a bit of recognition, tap like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss what's next. We'll keep pulling at the threads that history tucked away, not to scold the past, but to understand the cost of keeping a career in a town that punished the truth. Thanks for spending this time with me. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll see you in the next one.